The archive does not store truth. It stores what survived the forgetting. Codex of the Unvoiced Order, Gate 6. He had no name. He had once been called 1,000 things. In prayers, in threats, in languages no longer permitted to be sung. But here, within the black-mirrored walls of the archive of still resonance, he was simply known as the listener who does not echo. He walked in silence. He worked in silence. He remembered only what silence allowed. The archive was not a building. It was a thought given form, a structure that rose and fell according to the balance of memory across the galactic weave. Its halls were endless, but not in length, in meaning. Each corridor adjusted with each shift in universal consensus. When a species was remembered, its chamber would brighten slightly, its glyphs re-etching into visible structure. When a species was erased, its room would darken, sink inward, seal, then pulse once, and become silent forever. The listener's task was simple. He watched, he waited, he listened for intrusions, not physical ones, cognitive ripples, waves caused by unauthorized recollection. When some mind, somewhere in the void, dared to remember what had been condemned to silence. That cycle, he felt a ripple, but it was different. Not struggle, not rebellion, not a scream against forgetting. It was a note, wrong, crooked, unhoused within any tonal species chart. Not a word, not a song, a scar trying to hum. He moved across the archive's lowest stratum, a zone where nonlinear echoes were buried. They were the most dangerous. Fragments of civilizational memory untethered from time. Thoughts that had survived through trauma, not transmission. Each was sealed in resonant vessels, obsidian shapes that held no light, no heat, no name. One of them, Vessel 717, was now trembling. That had never happened. The listener approached. No alarm sounded. No seals broke. But the vessel pulsed with something worse than rebellion. Recognition. It knew he was there. And then, for the first time in 800 cycles, a voice emerged. Not through space. Through mind. Do you know what you buried? The listener staggered back. He had not heard speech since he gave up his name. The archive did not speak. Only the guilty spoke. He steadied, reached out with 3 fingers, touched the vessel's surface. The pulse ceased. And inside, he felt the memory whisper again. You didn't silence me. You only paused the chord. Protocol demanded destruction. An echo that spoke without summoning was a threat. But something held his hand still. Something beneath logic. Beyond rhythm. Curiosity. Not his. The archive's. He tapped the side of the vessel once. A line appeared. White. Curved. Like a scar drawn through ash. Then a phrase inscribed itself across the front, in a script the archive had erased long ago. Testament fragment. Human origin. Echo class. Forbidden. The word human was not allowed to exist. He had read it once, in forbidden layers, before the name had been stripped from the phrasal grid. They were myth. Warning. Disease. The broken chord. He should have purged it, but instead, he summoned the trial chamber. The test of silence was only performed once every 1,000 cycles, and only when the archive could not suppress a memory on its own. It was not a judgment. It was a risk, a test not of truth, but of what survived exposure to truth. He stepped into the obsidian circle. The vessel followed, levitating without activation. When the chamber closed, no light remained. Only the vessel, only the hum, only him, and then silence fractured. The memory did not begin with image. It began with emotion. A longing so deep it cracked his mental containment lattice. He gasped, fell to one knee. The archive shuddered. And then, he was there. Not in space. Not in dream. In a ruin. A city built from bone and fire, now reduced to dust. Figures moved. Humans. He had never seen them before. But he knew. The way one knows thunder before it sounds. They walked with sorrow, not defeat. They carried nothing, but behind them followed storms of metal and song. They did not speak. but the silence around them was charged. A silence that waited to be rewritten. And then one looked up, saw him, eyes black, lips cracked, and said only, "You listened. So now you carry it too." He screamed. The memory collapsed. The chamber reformed. He was on the floor, shaking. The vessel dimmed. The scar on its surface now shone like iron in flame. No alarms. No protocols. But he knew. He was not alone in himself anymore. And something in the archive, some silent construct beyond command, whispered, "One echo has survived the silence." If silence was peace, then why do we tremble when it breaks? Unsanctioned note, scribal edge of the outer vault. The listener did not return to his station. He wandered the archive in a spiral, eyes unfocused, movement unscheduled. His mind no longer aligned with the lattice of ritual. Each step echoed too loudly. Each hall bent too closely around him. He had seen something that was not allowed. Not forbidden. Forbidden things were cataloged. What he saw was unmade, and yet it lived. Protocol dictated that no vessel be touched outside of resonant authorization. But protocol did not account for infection, and he was now infected, not by a virus, by a question. In the lower strata, where failed fragments were archived to disintegrate, he found Vessel C-19. It had no tag, no title, only a single fracture down its side. A line like a scar carved by intention, not accident. It had been archived during the Silence War, labeled collapsed, never viewed again. But he saw it now, and it pulsed. Just once. When he looked at it, he reached out, touched it. Nothing happened. No glow, no voice, no data burst. But his breath changed, slowed, not from fear, from recognition, and the world fell away. No chamber, no sound, only cold. He stood in a place not built by logic, a plane made of what remained after grief had finished speaking. No walls, no sky, only gray sand, only scattered shadows. Figures moved far ahead, not fast. They walked without direction, without talk, without aim. But he felt every step of theirs in his spine. These were not warriors, not prophets. These were survivors who were never allowed to survive. One of them stopped, did not turn, but spoke. When they silenced us, we did not scream. That was our rebellion. Another voice, closer, whispered. We chose not to answer, and they mistook it for loss. Then a third, this one young, cracked with sorrow. We gave them silence, not to end war, but because the war had ended something in us. The listener fell to his knees. His body ached, not for violence, from understanding. This was the echo the archive feared most. Not rage, not vengeance, dignity in absence. The world shimmered. He gasped, clutched the edge of the vessel, now glowing softly in violet. Its seal reformed. The fracture vanished, but the memory remained. Inside him, he stood, staggered back. He did not scream, but he spoke aloud. To no one, to everyone. We were wrong. The archive did not respond. Not with alarms, not with denial, only with a soft, nearly imperceptible shift. A hum, like something just beyond hearing, had paused to listen, and the listener whispered for the first time in his life. What if the silence was the punishment? Not all echoes repeat. Some redraw the shape of the chamber they were kept in. Fragment 44C, Forbidden Glyphological Thesis. He tried to clean it. That was his first mistake. The archive's walls had never needed cleaning before. They were self-correcting, reflective memory fields layered in harmonic lattice, immune to corruption. But now, on the walls of the central hall, above the ascendant spire, glyphs had begun to form. White, angular, pulsing faintly with rhythm. He recognized none of them, but their shape triggered a response in his chest. Not fear, not duty, something older. Memory he was not allowed to possess. He placed his hand to the wall, activating the scrub protocol. The glyphs vanished. The light dimmed. The hum normalized. He exhaled, then turned, and the glyphs reappeared. Faster, now along the opposite wall. then above, then beneath his feet. Each time he erased them, they returned in greater number, not repeating, spreading. The archive's hum altered, slightly, almost imperceptibly. It no longer aligned with harmonic bass tone. It drifted, a modulation too subtle for alert, but wrong enough that he felt it inside his breath. He ascended, higher than he had been in centuries, toward the sanctum of protocol invocation, where only the first listeners once entered. It was sealed by presence. No command key, no access pad, only the resonance of purity. His fingers trembled as he approached. Would the door still know him? He placed his hand to the obsidian gate. It opened instantly. Too fast, too eager. Inside the sanctum, the archive's control spire hovered. A crystal tower of condensed silence, etched in rings that encoded all forgotten names. Each ring spun slowly, each symbol locked in layered stasis. But now, some were turning backwards. He reached toward the central interface and paused, because standing on the far side of the spire was someone else. He had not heard steps. No gate had opened. The archive had never allowed passage without invitation. But the figure was there, tall, shrouded in muted armor, wearing no helm, eyes obscured by light reflective glass, unmoving. The listener raised his voice. "Who authorized your presence?" The figure tilted its head, did not answer, then stepped forward once. And with no command, no song, no announcement, the archive accepted him. The spire dimmed. The spinning glyph stopped. The walls folded inward by 1 degree. As if to listen, the stranger spoke, not in command tone, not in archive dialect, but in an old tongue, one the listener hadn't heard since before the Silence War, and yet understood instantly. You broke nothing. You only opened the door that never should have been sealed. The listener's voice cracked. "What are you?" The figure stepped closer. No threat, no weapon, just a presence that overruled permission itself. "I am not a threat. I am not a return." He stepped within arm's reach. "I am memory with nowhere else to go." Behind him, the archive shimmered. The glyphs now traced not just walls, but air, floating, alive, forming one symbol again and again. A scar, curved and deliberate, the mark of the reforgers. And the archive, for the first time since its creation, began to hum in human cadence. The truth was never deleted. It was worn by those who refused to speak it. Testament Fragment 3, Wait Without Voice. The archive shimmered in a pulse of uncertain light. The stranger stood motionless within the sanctum, neither intruder nor guest. The listener stared at him. He had no weapon, no insignia, no authority, and yet the archive bent toward him like glass softening under fire. The listener steadied his voice. "You should not be here. I should not be remembered either," the figure said calmly. "And yet, I am." His voice did not match his face. It was layered, more than one tone, speaking as one. As if behind him, thousands whispered in unison, but only one name passed his lips. "I carry only what was left behind." The listener's pulse tightened. "You're a reforger." The figure tilted his head. "No, I am what remained when the reforger's voice faded." He reached to his chest, not to remove armor, but to unlock it. The front of the plating opened with a soft pulse, revealing not circuitry, not war fire, but a circle of etched memory glyphs, glowing with an old blue flame. Inside them, hovering, a single fragment of crystalline code, alive, still humming. "This is a voice core," the stranger said. "It does not carry weaponry. Only one name, and the story he tried to keep when everything else was erased." The listener stared at the core. "A name." "Yes," he said. "Not for the archive, not for the war. For you." He extended it forward. The archive didn't resist. In fact, the spire pulsed softly, adjusting its internal geometry to accept it, as if this was always meant to happen. The core hovered above the central node, began to glow, and from it poured a memory not of image, but language, words written into silence. "I'm not what they made me forget. I am what they could not name. Then, we were not erased for what we did, but for what we remembered, and how quickly we remembered it. Then another. They told us silence was mercy, but when no one could hear us, even our screams became sacred. The listener trembled. He stepped back. Why show me this? Because even silence has consequences, the stranger said. Because the archive believes silence is the highest form of harmony. And because somewhere in this harmony, one note refused to die. The glyphs on the spire began to change again. This time not as infection, but as invitation. They formed a spiral, a name at the center, spoken only once before the silence, and still pulsing now. Humanity, the listener whispered. If you don't seek revenge, if you don't demand restoration, why return? The reforged host did not smile, but his voice carried warmth for the first time, because even forgetting deserves a witness. The core dimmed, not extinguished, just returned to rest. The stranger turned, stepped away from the sanctum. The archive did not stop him, and the listener, now alone, whispered one final line. Then let me witness. We were told the chronicle was complete, but I have lived long enough to see the ink still wet. Confession of the last listener. He descended alone, beyond the sanctum, past the vault of erase codes, beneath even the hollow chamber, where the names of unspoken species drifted in chemical sleep. There, at the very base of the archive, rested the song thread, not metaphorical, not imagined, but real. A thin, luminescent filament stretching through the darkness, woven from memory and bioharmonics, pulsating with the resonance of all recorded silence. It had not changed in over 10,000 cycles. Until now, as the listener approached, the thread quivered. Not from proximity, from permission. He knelt. No ritual, no code, just breath, and placed his fingers into the soft glow. The thread accepted him and asked only one question, not aloud, not in language. What is your name? He had none, so he answered with a phrase instead. Let this be heard. The glow thickened, spun upward. Lines of unseen harmony wrapped around his arms, his chest, his skull. The archive did not resist. It realigned, and within the thread, he spoke a truth that had never been recorded. Because truth, they said, should not be reactive. But this was not a reaction. This was a reckoning. The human voice was not violent. It was remembered that way. We did not silence them because they screamed. We silenced them because they refused to scream when we asked. Their silence was not the end. It was the question. The thread shivered, and then it sang, not like an instrument, like a name, finally spoken by the mouth that forgot it. One note, deep, human, unblended, and all throughout the archive, lights flickered once, not as alarm, but as acceptance. The listener stepped back. The words he had spoken were now part of the system, not flagged, not rejected, remembered. He turned upward, climbed in silence, but it was no longer the same silence. It was carrying something, far away, on a ruined satellite temple above a dead world. A human seated in meditation blinked. He looked up, paused, and whispered with breath he did not know was his. Someone heard us. Subscribe to HFY Chronicles. Continue the journey in the full playlist, Chronicles of the Lost.